Okay, welcome everybody, and I've got Mark Keohane again here. Mark, we're going to touch on some really touchy subjects, or a subject, the dreaded T word, transformation.
I thought you were going to say Tyrannosaurus Rex.
No, that's another dreadful word, but transformation. Where are we in terms of, I believe that the Springboks wanted to have 50% representation at the World Cup. I don't see how they're going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the promise to the government was that their team, that match 23, would have 50%, which again, I wonder how, because there's 23 players. So, but that will be an equal split in Japan, because every time a Springbok World Cup squad gets announced, there's a problem about the number of black players in it. SARugbymag then promises it will never happen again. 4 years goes by and we get to that same situation. And again, it's not happening at Super Rugby level, it's not happening at Currie Cup level. So a national coach can only choose from the pool of players that are there. You know,
and if I know last year there was a lot of injuries to previously disadvantaged players, should we call it? Which I hate that word. I hate, you know, I come from Canada, spent a lot of time there. We never use the word black colored or anything like that. It's just not anything I'm used to. And Canada's probably one of the most non-racial countries in the world.
But if you look and go back to 2000, when Harry Flume was the coach and was involved with the Springboks, we had to have 4 black players in our match 22. There were 3 playing in 120 in Super Rugby. Yeah. So at that time, Conrad Jantjies was picked out of the under-20s as a 4th player. He was a very good fullback and should have been there, in time he would have been there naturally as a footballer. He's one of the most talented versatile schoolboy sportsmen. But if you look again at where we were last year in terms of the euphoria in the England series, it was a very representative Springbok side that came from 24-3 down to have their magnificent win against England. And I just feel there's a sense that that momentum hasn't been built on again, not so much through the Springboks, but through the Super Rugby coaches. So you look again, top 8 out of 23 in terms of match squads, the 4 South African teams in the first week, last week of Super Rugby, 5 in the 15, not one black head coach. So again, it's very skewed to how can a Springbok team...
How many black coaches have they promised?
Well, you know, again,
there's not even 5 good white coaches in this
Well,
country.
I wonder if there's 5 good coaches, period. But the reality is that the white coaches get that opportunity. Yeah. They get given a platform from which to coach. You take someone like Robbie Fleck at the Stormers.
If he was black, would he have gotten 3 years?
Well, if he was black, he'd still be coaching under 19s because they'd still be developing him. Yeah. So he coached the Province under 19 side. They won the league. They won the title. The very next year, Eddie Jones said goodbye to Tabletop Mountain and went to England. They gave Robbie Fleck the job, which I was very surprised with. Lack of experience. They said they were going to groom him. His 3 years have been a disaster. Last year, 6 wins out of 16. Scored 18 tries less with 1 game more. Said, judge me this year. 40 points to 3 away from home. Said it's a bad day at the office. Said I'm not under any pressure. I've got a contract till the end of the year. We'll see what happens then. They've got a bloody good squad as well. So they should be getting better results. They've gone the opposite way in the graph. So the point that I raised on Twitter as well is, and it's for discussion and for debate, it's, you know, and I get accused of being pro-black and anti-white and racist, is we see how Peter de Villiers was treated. The pressure that was put on Alistair Coetzee when he wasn't performing. Yet, when there's a white coach that doesn't perform, the vitriol isn't quite half as bad. We saw Nollis Marais. He was diabolical with the Bulls. You never have had the job, but it was give him another year. Last year, give Fleck another year. But if it was a coloured or black coach, after 1 year of supposed failure, we'd say it just proves they can't coach, they're not good enough. So the thing with the transformation from me is create the opportunities and try and see the 2 individuals as equal, whether they're white or black. But the game is still very white in this country. At the essence of the game is white. There is this push for black players to come through. But one of those interesting statistics was, since professionalism in 1996, there's 25 schools have made up 44% of the Springboks. And of those 44% of the Springboks, it equates to 131 players, 119 are white. 6 are coloured and 5 are ethnic black. That is a weighted and skewed player pool that's coming through in terms of international players.
So how do we get the grassroots? I mean, I've always felt that you can't change it now. You can't identify, say, 15 or 20 black players now and say, okay, it's got to have happened over time. There's got to be an evolution of talent that comes through, and a lot of those black players could become your coaches and could become involved in rugby after their careers end. I mean, very much like white players do.
You know, I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago where I said cricket 6-7 years ago said there's a quota system, not at grassroots level, at regional level. There will be 3 ethnic black players in your starting 11. There will be 6 players of color in your starting 11, non-negotiable. And within 2 months, those were the players who were scoring the runs, taking wickets, and now your Proteas side is so representative of South Africa, all on merit. It's every single demographic is represented there, and they're a good side, be it T20s, ODIs, Test cricket. But you go and it's been done at the regional franchise, so the pool of player is there. Grassroots it's not an exercise; it's just a way of life, and that should be non-negotiable. But at Super Rugby level, every year we say, with the goodness of their heart, that they will change, but it doesn't change.
I pose this then, Mark. If we looked at the franchises, now the franchises are still run by amateurs, in my opinion. You've got amateurs running a professional sport. If they were all professional and owned by companies, very much like they are in the UK and like the Pro 14 and those competitions, they're bloody tough competitions. If they were all owned professionally, then we wouldn't have the issue that we have today.
Well, you wouldn't have you wouldn't have the issue in terms of coaches, in terms of players, but South Africa is also very unique in terms of the transformation. So we are very different to the rest of the world. But if you look at a coaching situation, if you take the Toulon owner, the billionaire owner, what he's done, how he's fired coaches in the past, how he's told players just to get lost.
Yeah, he's a bit eccentric.
He is eccentric, but you know, the mediocrity isn't tolerated there because it's very dependent on results. Here we're in this constant rut of mediocre, and it's like there's always going to be tomorrow because no one gets relegated. Yeah. The one year you had that thing where was it going to be the Lions or Kings who fell out, players said they couldn't play anymore, the pressure of not having job security. Now if you play in any other professional league in the world, your job security is determined by your performance. You can't say, if we're going to get relegated, what happens to me then? Well, then you've got to play a bit better. And if I just look at our Super Rugby setup, and this is a World Cup year, and I think we can pick 30, 35 players good enough to go to the World Cup and be very competitive. But if we constantly looking to evolve the game 27 years after unity, and there was a rich 100+ year history of black rugby, but when you go onto the social media sites, what you get is blacks don't play rugby, they play soccer. Never met a black guy who enjoys rugby. This is a new thing. That's the minority still ruling so much. And then you look at our professional setup, it is still very white dominated, and there's some very average white players and average white coaches who continue to prosper.
There always has been, because rugby has been a very political sport in every nation. In Wales, you know, you've got the north and south. In England, you've got the north and south divide. You know, it's always been politicized. You know, if you just look at it from a simple look at the US, for example, the NBA. They choose from every walk of life. And blacks dominate that sport. They dominate the American football, the NFL. The only sport that I think they don't dominate is hockey, because they're not stupid enough to get up at 5 in the morning and go to an arena in minus 20-degree weather. It's they pick from their entire population, and there's never a race issue. And all those teams are owned professionally. They're all professional organizations, and they're all judged on wins and losses. And they get the best players playing those games. There's never a talk of race when it comes to North America, which to me is the blueprint on how to run professional sports.
I agree on what you're saying about professional sport and how to run it and the North American models. If you go back and look at the history of South African rugby, we look at South African sport, but specifically South African rugby. In 1992, when there was unity, and my belief has always been that black rugby gave up so much as a compromise to the existing stronghold, which was the white minority rugby that ran rugby in this country, because they had the infrastructure, they had the funding, they had the IRB backing, and they had the white media backing. And they've been on the back foot ever since. So even if you look at amateur clubs. So many of those black clubs gave up their identity to merge with another club, but very few white clubs gave up that identity. So to me, it's something we've got to constantly revisit. We've got to constantly talk about it and not get abusive about it and get defensive about it. It has to improve. The future of our game in 2030 is not going to be white. It's going to be, the Springbok team is going to be more black than it's going to be white over time. Let's get it right now and let's just create playing opportunities for these players. And that's why I blame the coaches and say they tend to revert to type when they pick, and that the teams are white dominated that they do pick. And it's like, wow, I did well to pick 5 or to pick 8 black players, but those 8 black players are the best players there. So they do no one a favor. It's just actually opening their minds to saying we live in a very different society. We live in a society where the demographic is black dominated, and it's not all soccer players. There's a hell of a lot of kids who come through and have always played rugby.
I think one of the issues as well is that Supersport had played their part in suppressing rugby in terms of making it a continue to lead a sport. In that it's not free to air, never has been. So how is the game ever going to be embraced by a previously disadvantaged population?
Well, when you had 2 years ago, I think South Africa played Ireland, it was under Alistair Coetzee. I think the amps were 600,000 viewers on SuperSport for the game, delayed onto SABC. I think it was 10 million that watched the game 4 hours later. Now, surely if you want to grow your game, you take it to that mass market and you make it available. You look at England against, I think it was England against Ireland. Terrestrial TV, 9.8 million or 19.8 million, something like that, tuned in, one of the biggest ever to watch a game because it wasn't pay-per-view. So there's all these commercial considerations and sponsorship considerations, but if we are true about wanting rugby to be the most transformed sport in this country, representative of everyone who lives in this country, and to be a powerhouse and a top 3 nation over the next 20 years, we've really got to break those shackles once and for all. And I still feel we play with those shackles. We don't just come in with a sledgehammer and actually apply all our way to it.
I honestly believe that the people, the fans out there, don't give a toss what color the person is, as long as they win. If you look at, I think 5 years ago, whatever it was, in soccer it was Booth, and everybody screamed Booth, you know. And in rugby it was Beast. It was quite ironic when you think about the cult-like figure following that a white person had in soccer and a black person had in rugby, which to me said everything I needed to know. The fans out there just want the best and a winning team.
And I agree, and I'm not, you know, when I bring up transformation, and I'm not knocking the fans, they take it very personally. They get very abusive in their responses. I'm knocking the system. I'm knocking those who in the leadership at regional level, and then obviously at national level. And you know, does the tail wag the dog, or is the dog in charge? It's South African rugby as the custodians. To me, I've always had a responsibility to ensure certain things. And if they're not getting that support and that base at regional level, you've got to ask why. And that's where the fight is, because the regions are the heartbeat of the Springboks.
But surely SARU has given millions upon millions to those to supposed grassroots rugby.
They have, and they've kind of engaged in constructive discussions all the time. And you had last year, Rassie Erasmus met with all the Super Rugby coaches. He's got a very strong relationship with them. But what still happens is the regional coach or the regional president or the regional CEO says, my region is far more important than any Springbok match or any World Cup win, because my livelihood is dependent on this. So they don't always make calls, and we spoke about this a week ago, in the interest of the national game. But when it comes to transformation, it is in the interest of the national game, because a white Springbok and a white South African landscape in 10 years' time will be a dying one, or one that's close to death. And we've just got to get it right now. We keep on postponing it by a year, or by another 4 years, because it's World Cup year. And
well, lip service is paid on election year. Promise is made. We're going to do this, checks in the mail, I love you, and all those other wonderful things. And then as soon as the election's over, then it reverts back to managing a process and campaigning, you know, to become, you know, they all campaign, each president in each province. You know, I think the tail does wag the dog in this situation, and there's going to need to, it's like we need to rip that Band-Aid off and really engage properly and come up with something. Because you're right, in 2030 or in 10, 15 years time, we need this game to be embraced by the whole country.
And to me, it's just a thing that let's keep on talking about it constructively till it happens. And ironically, it's also a minority that goes on social media and says not race again. It's not the majority that are saying not race again. So a transformed South African rugby landscape will be a powerful one, and it will also be a winning one.
Yeah, I think so too. I wouldn't pay too much attention to those trolls. Thanks, Mark.